Welcome, 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 everyone, to another show, another episode of Walking with the Master. And let me tell you, I have a genuine master on the mat. As you'll see, you'll get an opportunity to truly understand his proficiency and his ability. And of course, I'm speaking of no one other than Hanshi Gregory Duncan, the son one of the sons of the late, great um, Grandmaster Ronald Duncan. Welcome, Hanshi. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much. And good morning, Grandmaster Muhammad. I'm doing
Man,
good. I just want to thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to come on and spend some time with you and have our conversation. Thank you.
yes, you're very welcome. And I'm really excited. I this show helps me to be more and more excited because there's so many people who think that they know you, they know myself, they know others that come on the show, but they get it such a great opportunity to listen to the real a real understanding of who everyone is, who you are. So I'm appreciative that you have given and that you are giving the opportunity for others to benefit from this here. And I'm truly grateful and humbled. So I gotta give you that humble bow. Yes,
I'm humbled as well. Thank you very much. Thank you
yes,
very
sir.
much.
You're
Such
very
great.
welcome.
Yes, sir.
But in this show, what we normally do is what I normally do is I always want to start at the root. And what is the root? The root is where we began, where we begin, because it's said that before a plant shoot comes up above the ground, it goes deep into the ground, establishing its roots, and then comes up. So we want to go into that early time, your beginning. And can you kind of go over a little of your beginning and how you got started, what you started with, and all of that good stuff? It's in your hands.
Yes, sir. Well, as my dad would often say, I was exposed and raised in the martial arts from the cradle. I was always around it. It was a part of my being growing up. It was just a part of what we did. Um, the exposure that I had was tremendous. But I started, as a young child. I was born in the '60s, so that gives me 5+ decades of training and exposure. My dad was my primary instructor. He was my primary teacher. You know, um, in the arts allow me to get that exposure and also allow me the possibilities of being able to spread my wings and fulfill what my passions were in the martial arts. So I'm always eternally grateful for that. But his teaching still dwell within me, and I'm just very blessed and I feel privileged that I'm still able to do what I'm doing, and I'm still able to have a recount of what he's passed on to me.
That's beautiful, beautiful. And I wanna. I mean, he was such an icon. And just think about this: that you grew up. You're not just the student, but you're the son. So you had a father who cared for you as a child, as a son, but
Yeah.
he also had the opportunity to guide you and see your prowess, your ability as a young man. Tell me about Dad, man. Tell me, how was the great Grandmaster Ronald Duncan? How was he? What was he? Tell me your uh, what was that life like?
There were many facets to my father. Many people often see him as a person who was very focused and had a dimension of intensity. That also existed within our relationship and the dynamic of him as a father. But he had many layers. There was a sensitive side to him, of course, being a parent, being a father. You know, I was one of five siblings, and my dad was very creative. There was things about him that people don't realize, that he was a very talented singer. Uh,
Mm,
yes, music was something that was so important to him, very important to him. And some of my siblings have inherited that. My brother is a very good musician, plays the saxophone, has a love for the music and the arts. But my dad, I remember my earlier years, when we lived in Brooklyn, he would go out and he would perform in front of big bands. He would wear remember those shiny silvery tuxedos, and he would
yeah.
actually sing lead in front of these big 20-piece bands. And I kind of took that for granted, but I knew that he had that ability, because being that he was from Panama, and when he was younger, he actually recorded a record. And, so his trajectory could have gone either way, either in music or anything else that he had put his mind to. But that's one of the very unique things about my father that I often think about. And I think about his ability to be diverse in his passions and his skill sets. But, growing up with my dad as a pioneer and practitioner of the arts, it was just what it was. I mean, I can't imagine it being any other different. I mean, I can't imagine it being different any other way. Um, and it was just part of what I did, who we were. For me, I just inherently had a passion for the arts. So there were times when he would kind of discourage me from getting involved in the martial arts, because he knew the challenges were it. But I was just, I had a passion. I enjoyed, whether I was actually on the mat training or just in the dojo watching. And to me, it was just like, I didn't mind spending a whole Saturday going to this dojo that he had in Brooklyn, 519 Court Street. And that was a very iconic school. A lot of individuals passed through the doors at that 519 Street dojo, the American Bushido Martial Arts Federation. But I remember as a child, my brother and I going there on Saturday, spending all day watching these guys train. And to me, that was a highlight.
Mm.
So, but yeah, he made sure that we had a balance. There was a balance in my life. I was involved in sports, involved in different types of athletics, and he supported that. And if I needed time away from the culture or the world of martial arts, then I make sure I took that time.
Beautiful.
which consists of ninjutsu and the combat aiki jiu-jitsu systems. In addition to that, we still are teaching the philosophy, and we're trying to work on the aspect, the never-ending aspect of character building with the practitioners, to instill all of those good values that young people need today to cope with the changing times. I don't teach as much as I used to. I don't get a chance to teach anymore. I have, my son Greg is my chief assistant instructor. I have other individuals in the dojo, Mr. Mel Oliver, Orpheus Haywood, and all of the black belts, Livingston Kelly, Carl Hopkins. These are young men who are giving much of their lives to the dojo, and they've been very helpful to me. I tell you, to be honest with you, sometimes I want to teach, they won't even let me, because they're so devoted, and and in addition to being devoted, they're very skilled practitioners. We're doing very well here, and we see our growth, hopefully into the 21st century and beyond that. And I think other concepts that we follow are valid concepts, which I feel have withstood the test of times, going into 5 decades, and I think we will be around to share our knowledge and our skills and ourselves with would future generations come.
You know, there was a period when I had given an event in 1990,
Yes.
and it was a big, it was a big event. It was awesome. I don't know if it's have been even rivaled the type of an event. Well, where it was called Tribute to the Masters, the same title that Grandmaster, I believe it's Grandmaster Wesley Snipes
Yes.
had done, because in fact, it was, I had met him and talked to him and invited him to
Yeah.
come and be on the dais. At that time, he wasn't as known, he wasn't really known. In that time, we were actually shooting at that point, New Jack City,
Yeah.
that he was in.
Yeah.
So he had come to that event and he was there. Now, this particular event had, some major martial artists way past my, acumen even, and it was incredible. But I mentioned that because my attempt to get Shinan Antonio Pereira to come to the event, there were some things that had happened, and I'm not going to go into all of that. It was great, but
Yeah.
the end result of it, I was at his school. He said, "Come, young man, follow me," and he took me into his office. And when he took me into his office, he said, "Let me show you something." And he opened up an album. And in this album, I saw your father, I saw Grand Professor V, I saw Dr. Moses Powell. They had on black belts. They just had on black gis, black belts. I mean, and it was years earlier.
Yes.
And I was, I was in amazement. And he said to me at that time, he said, "Young man," he said, "because of you, I'm bringing my whole school over." And he literally, to that event, he brought easily, it was 50 black belts.
Wow.
And their families. I had maybe 75. And I had at that event about just under 1,000, about 960 something people at that event. And it was incredible. But I was mentioning that to just say that your father, that's the point that I'm making right now, is that the Black martial artists were together in a great aspect, even though they were separate in terms of what they were doing.
Right.
But there were times they came together, like when we come together, and we're from different systems and styles, but our care for each other. So I wanted to just mention that.
Yeah.
That they had some relationship way back in the 50s, that they were dealing and coming together for whatever the reason, for training purposes, of course, and even more, I'm sure. So in terms of Dad, and I'm just staying with Dad for a minute, so that he deserves so much, because he's had to fare so many different things, especially back in that time. See, we don't realize, many people that may be listening, they don't realize how difficult it was to come up in that time and not be consumed by somebody else, by another system, that they made their system to be accepted and appreciated because of what they did. So if you could speak to some of that, that would be great, and we'll move on from there.
Well, yes, my father, his history runs very deep, going back into the 50s.
Yes.
Going back into the 50s. Of course, even being born in Panama, he had exposure to the martial arts then as well. He started off in boxing. He studied some Chinese arts. He studied Chi Chi Su, which is Chinese nerve pinching. But he was always exposed. He had a very early exposure to the martial art. And I say all this because his progression and his exposure to it also led up into how he evolved and was able to have a vision that allowed him to develop his skill sets and his system. But in the 50s, we all know what this country was like in the 50s when it came to the cultural landscape.
That's right.
And he had to endure certain things. And it's very quite historic because his one of his early instructors, Professor Ernie Cates, incredible judo slash jujitsuka. And he was one of the top practitioners at the time. And he was a Marine. My father was a Marine. And this story is told often. This story is told quite often that when my father had eventually started training with Professor Cates, and this is down in Greensboro, South Carolina, I believe, North Carolina, South Carolina, where the Camp Lejeune base would be.
Mhm.
And he walked several miles through a town that was very hostile and very segregated.
Mm.
And when he walked into that dojo, everybody literally stopped and he walked to the front door. Okay, this is 1956,
Yes.
57. He walked to the front door and they literally had to cover up those windows. So he broke that barrier. He broke the
Mm.
racial barrier. And at that time, there was quite a few notable practitioners who eventually went on and became pioneers in their own rights. And from that day on, he and Professor Cates have become very close. And my father trained and earned a Kodokan black belt in judo with Professor Cates. And to this day, he still speaks of that pivotal moment that was quite historic. So I say that because that was one aspect of his endurance, of his fortitude, and he had a vision. He knew what he wanted as a martial artist, as a Marine. And so breaking those types of barriers, I think, is such a landscape of people to recognize that it did take fortitude. To this day, it still takes fortitude, but back then it was quite
Mm.
different. Practitioners, those glass ceilings existed. The threats, being as volatile as it was back then, but he maintained and he sustained. And there were other stories that I can recant, but nonetheless, I think that was a very critical point in his history, and he endured that. So going on and having other instructors, Japanese-based martial art instructors, he trained with Dr. Naraki Hara of the Hakuryu organization. He was part of the Hakuryu Kindai Gakuryu. He had a lot of Japanese traditional martial arts. And even back then, there were certain things he had to endure and deal with, but it made him strong. It gave him that fortitude. It made him understand that he always had to work a little bit harder because of the nature, the cultural nature. But, you know, when he established himself in Brooklyn, when he eventually left the southern areas and came to Brooklyn, he had one of the earlier storefront dojos. And he had a lot of traditional certification and validation from the traditional Japanese arts. And that was very rare at that time. You're talking about in the late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah.
His first commercial school, one of his first commercial, well, he started teaching at the St. John's Recreation Center. And of
Mm.
course, that's where a lot of, we understand that Dr. Powell and many of the other individuals had passed through those doors.
Yes.
And he taught there, and that was probably the early days when my father and Dr. Powell had met and became colleagues and so forth and so on. And he opened his first commercial school at 519 Court Street in Brooklyn, Red Hook, Brooklyn. And that was quite historic. That was 1964. And at that time, he was teaching traditional martial arts from Aikijutsu, Jiu-Jitsu, Goshindo Kempo under Naraki Hara. He was part of Hakuryu organization. And that was a very pivotal point, especially in the East Coast martial arts. So, and of course, at that time, there's still a certain cultural dynamic that, he had to overcome. but it gave him an upward trajectory, and that is something that part of history I endure. I mean, I embrace, I embrace that. And I love that part of that history because, there's so many lessons involved with that, especially as people of color, when you have to adhere to a culture, that is very, when they define their art as being indigenous of theirs, sometimes they're a little bit more, difficult on you. They're a little bit more challenging on those who are considered outsiders, you see. But, to your point, he had to overcome, like many other practitioners at that time. He had to overcome. But, to use the term pioneer, he was a pioneer.
Yes.
He broke a lot of barriers.
That's so beautiful. And we have to honor real pioneers such as that, because if they actually set the stage for us to do what we do the way we do it, and they had to endure so much more than us. We have to give them all of the credit in the world for doing what they have done. That's so right. So now, in terms of yourself now, and you're a young man coming up in the art under your dad, and what were some of the difficulties that you may have come across in just being the son of someone who is already recognized as an icon when you were even growing up?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, of course, there's always going to be expectations. People have expectations. And I think with that being said, I kind of put my own pressure on my own self because, I always want to live up to those expectations.
Yes.
Now, did he put the expectations on me? No, he didn't. But I put it on myself. I realized that, okay, this is what I'm a part of. And being who I am, I was always a stickler for details and somewhat of a perfectionist. So I always strive to make sure that I had a certain level of skill set. Being able to embrace what was disposable to me in terms of everything, being able to absorb, everybody who I came in contact with. But my challenges were a little bit different. I think it was really more so predicated on what I perceived as being an expectation. Now, some people may have had biases because for whatever reason, they probably had a bias towards my father. Therefore, they have a bias towards myself. But that didn't really, it didn't factor in for me.
Yes, sir. Well, you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay,
yeah.
Good. Well, I mean, see, that is a mark that I believe of a champion, because the champion themselves, see, you already saw the ability in your father, in the system itself. So you created and put on yourself the expectations that you felt were necessary for being able to come up. I understand that. I would hope that others would understand what that means. See, because while some people are operating off of expectations of others, right, when you put on yourself, and when you see what you're looking at and you see it as being great, then you have to put on yourself the expectations to relate and operate off of the greatness that you see. So I understand and I appreciate that, what you just said, in terms of putting on yourself expectations so that we kept it up. Because you came up in a time too, and I don't know if you've experienced much of it. I mean, they didn't actually come into my school and some of our schools because I believe they understood, but there were back in the days, back in the 70s, they would there were dojos that would actually go to other dojos to challenge teachers.
Mm-hmm. I'm familiar with that.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
And I know some that actually, this actually happened to, but there were those that they didn't attempt that uh, with every dojo, but
Right.
they did do it with some. So I guess their expectations, they had expectations too,
Oh yeah.
that they gave to themselves, because it wasn't every dojo that they walked into,
No.
if you can imagine.
Mm. Yeah, those are very interesting times. A lot of stories I've heard and come across, but fortunately today there's a different mindset. I
Yes.
think there's a different level of consciousness, and but of course it was very competitive back in the day, and people had to prove themselves in different manners, and I think that carries over from the Japanese culture as well.
Yes.
It's also stated, and it's a fact that people, if you walked into a dojo a certain way, dressed a certain way, that signified that that was a challenge. You know, and so I think that kind of carried over. But fortunately, today we don't have to contend with that in that regard. There are challenges in other ways. Now we have social media. That does it,
Yes.
right? Yeah, the internet. Uh,
That's right.
but yeah, the '70s was quite interesting. But
Yes.
it forged us.
Yes. Yes. So with that being said, Hanshi, tell me, what are your thoughts about differences from yesterday's student and today's student?
Well, I think the difference is a reflection of the culture. You know, I say culturally, the mindset is different. It carries over into how people are going to train. And this is nothing genuine in this conversation. I mean, everybody kind of agrees that because we're in a faster paced culture, a faster paced society, we have access, we have disposal of content, information is right there at our fingertips. So I think that that kind of permeates in how people behave and what they expect. So, if somebody steps into a dojo, in their mind, they think they can acquire a certain amount of knowledge probably within 18 months, And not saying
Right.
that they can't, because, you can just click on whatever link and you can get access to certain things, and it kind of permeates and it sinks into your consciousness of what's available and what you can do. I think it changes the approach of training, because there is a lot of content. There is a lot of information. And I think if utilized the right way, you can educate yourself as a martial artist exponentially greater than maybe 2 or 3 generations ago. You know, if I wanted to figure something out as a youth, you know, I had to get on my bike and ride to the library and research it.
Yes.
If you couldn't find it in the bookstore or whatever, you're going to libraries. And when you found what you're looking for, that was golden. That was true research. But now, you can just Google it, everything pops up and it's right there. So I think that kind of impacts the the way people train today. I think it has an impact on people's nature, the essence of what they bring to the floor, what they bring to the mat. I'm not saying it's bad or good, it's just a different approach. Now, at the end of the day, technically, are people more technically sound? That's always up for debate. You know, I think that the I think the grind of the training may be different. I think people now can train smarter, like the old adage was, well, no pain, no gain. I think that's a bit archaic, because if you're training with pain, you're breaking down your body. And from my perspective, we want to train for longevity. My youngest student is 4, my oldest is 72. So I tell people, understand what your limitations are. And if you're 52, you want to be able to train when you're 72. You know, if you're 72,
Right.
you train when you're 82, you know, but as long as you recognize what your limitations are, that gives you that mindset, you know. So, you know, certain things I think we've evolved as a practitioner. You know, we're able to educate ourselves differently to preserve ourselves. You know, we didn't want to break ourselves down to think that we're proving a point. You follow?
Yeah.
Um, you know, but there's a foundation that's been laid for those individuals, from those individuals who trained a generation ago, 2 generations ago. You know, they really set the way. They, for me, you know, I still embrace the old methodology of training. You know, I still have a 60-year-old makiwara in my dojo that I inherited from my father. And on my spare time, I hit it. I condition my hands on a regular basis. That's not something that you see often in today's environment of martial arts. And for some people, they may think that's archaic, but I embrace that because that's a part of my foundation. And when I show that to students, they're like, wow, that's, you know, it's usually an eye-opening type of thing. So, you know, there has to be a balance. I think there's a
Yes.
balance. You know,
Yes.
I think as instructors today, I think we should, I think it's our responsibility to make sure that that we preserve those old ways of training, that we
Yes.
integrate it, but also be, you know, we have to be progressive. You know, we have to know how to evolve. You know, the importance of evolution of our
Yes.
methodology.
Excellent. Excellent. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan uh, had a series of talks, and they were called "The Time and What Must Be Done," and you know that makes me to think about that. You know, see the based on the time
Hmm.
requires a particular activity. There are things like you say you keep some things for yourself to that comes from that time, but
Yes.
then there are other things that are appropriate for the time that we're in, because really they're it produces different characteristics,
Yeah.
both types of training. So you're very right in my opinion. Being balanced
Hmm.
is not saying give up everything. It's just saying uh, do what is appropriate at this time
Yes.
to accomplish the task and to keep one uh, continuing to train.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely, absolutely. So talk to me uh, really about conversations that you think at this time is necessary for students. It's necessary to now. I'm going to give you a couple of different students.
Yeah.
Maybe three. The three different students I'm going to give you that you're going to talk to is the new student coming in to the dojo, coming into the way of training, coming into the knowledge of this for the first time, and what kind of conversation is that? Then you have the black belt. You
Mm.
know, they have studied for whatever period of time that they were able to achieve that level with you,
Right.
um, and they're black belt. And let's just say that this again is you're an instructor of known reputation and proficiency, and this is for any black belt, if you will,
Mm.
that is desirous of moving forward. So you have that that new student doesn't know much other than what's been in the movies and what's on YouTube, and just kind of moving from one thing to the next. And then you have the black belt who has contributed some time,
Mm.
to you, but this is a protracted struggle,
Mm.
you know, that
Mm.
doesn't end. Black belt, as we know it, is actually the beginning of another level
That's right.
of expertise. And then you have that master, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Uh, this, man, I've gotten to the stage now, my belt, my black belt is now changing colors, and now as a master under a master, what is the thought, So I know I gave you just there's um, a lot in that, and you can pull it together however you'd like. But talk to me. I'm a new student coming in. What should I consider in this period of my development?
Well, the first thing I ask people, what are your objectives? Why are you getting involved in the martial arts? And as long as you're clear in terms of what your end goal, what your objectives are, then you can really define and tap into that aspect of why you want to do this. But typically, not typically, always, I tell people to make sure that when you step on to the mat, you walk into my dojo, that you have good intentions. We want to train with positive intentions, you see, because martial arts for me, and this translates into every aspect, every level, beginner, intermediate, the black belt, the master. It's a personal and it's a very spiritual venture. As my dad will always tell myself and the students and the family, it's a spiritual thing. And that's your first level of protection. You want to protect your spirituality. Martial arts, I try to explain to people who can understand this, is that you want to allow it to transform you. Now, it may transform you spiritually, it may transform you physically, but there should be some level of transformation.
Yeah.
In the most rudimentary sense, developing your body, we're doing our conditioning, you're doing your crunches, you're stretching, you're transforming, you're building yourself. You're building yourself. At the same time, you have to keep in mind the importance of that focus. Because where the head goes, we all know the body follows. So you have to, that's what I mean, you have to come in with good intentions. Your intention is to make sure that you are transforming. And that's, to me, that's a very important facet, because now once you're able to accumulate and develop a foundation of skill sets as a basic, as a novice, as a neophyte, as some may say, eventually you're going to understand that you have the ability of self-viability. Understanding, okay, how do I protect myself now? What skills have I acquired? Am I able to have that level of viability when it comes to self-defense or, combative measures? Now, the conversation that I typically have with beginners is that, you have to have the patience, and you do not compete or compare yourself to anybody else, because we're all coming in at different levels with different capabilities, different attributes. So if I have a class of beginners and one person is 20 and the other person is 50, they're two different types of individuals. That 50-year-old has to measure where he starts, where she starts. And from that point, that's what they got to focus on. Okay, how am I progressing? How am I transforming? If you can do 2 push-ups today, God willing, by next month, you're doing 22, you see? And as long as that's put into place, then that's where the longevity of the training comes into place. As we progress, then of course, there's always that conversation of reality. Okay. Realistically, what are your limitations? What are your strengths and what are your limitations? And if you can come in terms with that and recognize what your limitations are. I mean, if somebody just says to me, well, I want to be able to kick straight up in the air, but meanwhile, you have bad hips, so you have a hip replacement, is that realistic?
Right.
Is that realistic? So the way I've always been taught, and the way philosophically my father will always try to transmit, was that we have to constantly make adjustments. If you're able to make adjustments based upon what your realization is, then that's when you really start fulfilling what your objectives may be. You see, and it all interconnects, but I think we should never, never let the importance of our spirituality dissipate. That's something said that there should always be first and foremost. because we're, as beings, as people, we're spiritual people. Am I right?
That's that's right.
And everything we do is interconnected with that. So when we understand that, I think that that plays a heavy role in our martial art journey. Of course, we understand the combatives. That goes without saying. We want to make sure that we have a certain degree of proficiency and understanding of what's going to allow you, that's going to give you that insurance. Nothing's ever guaranteed, but at least we have that much more insurance of
Yeah.
being
Yes.
viable. You follow. And then, of course, as you progress and you get into your later years of training and more experience and more exposure, and as you stated, that belt is very symbolic. As you stated, your belt now, I have a few of them. I have a couple of black belts that are now they're not even black anymore.
Yeah, right.
They
Right.
turn to white. And I think philosophically, and I think it's interesting because life is that complete circle, and there's an old adage, you know, twice a child, once an adult.
Hmm.
You see, when we're babies, we're being nurtured and we're relying upon those who are caring for us. And then when we get to adulthood, now we think we know it all. And those who took care of us, this guy's a fool, and then eventually you mature. And now you understand the wisdom that was bestowed upon you from those who came before you. And you see things much more differently. So it was almost like a brand new beginning of understanding. You raised and you've risen yourself psychologically, spiritually. Your wisdom is different. So if you look at that and say twice a child, once an adult, I think that that ties in to who we are as martial artists. If you are blessed to have that amount of longevity as a practitioner, you know, um, as I get older and I see that I have to make certain adjustments, being 5 decades plus into this game, into this way of life, um, I feel, first of all, I feel extremely blessed because I'm still able to do what I've had a lifetime of a passion doing.
Yes.
I'm still able to do it. I'm still healthy. Martial arts has given me a vehicle of understanding the importance of health. It's given me a vehicle of being able to um, help others, being able to transmit and pass on certain things to others that's going to help them transform. So to me, that's an extreme blessing.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't take that for granted. I never ever take that for granted. To be able to share and pass along certain things that are very important to you and to the world and in life, that's an extreme blessing right there. As trite as that may sound, but these are things that we cannot overlook and we cannot take for granted.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And the master, you know, I guess we can call them, or I know we look for them to be um, those who will maintain the legacy
Yeah.
and continue to spread the legacy uh, uh, without much deviation.
Mm.
So what in with that in mind,
Yes.
talk to us masters, talk to the masters about, you know, what we should be thinking, what we should be doing, how, what kind of focus we should have in this uh, perpetuation.
If you're if you're committed to honoring your teachers and those who came before you,
Yes.
okay, and the conversation of legacy comes up a lot. Every time you step on the floor, every time you teach a technique, you're honoring your teacher. You're honoring that legacy. Every time you mention your teacher's name, every time I mention my father's name, every time I teach a technique and transmit and express something that came from him, I'm honoring him.
Yeah.
I'm honoring that legacy. So, I think most of us understand that, you see. And at the same time, we have to have a vision. What's next? what's next? Does it stop here with us? Does it continue with somebody else, with another student, with somebody else who's able to embrace what we've been doing? Because martial arts is a continuum. As my father always told me, this is bigger than all of us together. It's been here long before us, and it's going to be here long after we're gone.
Yes.
You see, and there is nothing new under the sun. You see, it's interesting. I remember one of my students had brought me, she had shared a book that she had. It was written and it was published in it could have been like in the 1920s. And it was a judo / jujitsu book. This thing was an artifact. It was a beautiful book. And I'm looking at this book that was done in the 1920s, 1914, whatever. And I'm looking at these techniques, and the same thing that we practice in jujitsu, taijutsu 100 years ago. You see? So, the point that I make is that, it's been here, it's been here since the beginning of time, and it's going to continue to be here. So in terms of our specific vision and our specific legacy based upon our lineage, we have to be very responsible, with that. If it means that much to us, we have to be very responsible, and we have to take care of it and protect it.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love it, man. I love talking to you.
Yeah.
I appreciate your intellect. I appreciate your disposition. Your character is flawless. Yeah, it's just beautiful. I appreciate you in that way, and I would ask, of course, for us later on to be able to come together again and have dialogue, because this is, so important for our students and others to understand you. I mentioned this before, that, Doc used to say, I am Sanukis. Now, he was saying himself, he was Sanukis. And I didn't quite understand. And I had a more of an immature understanding of that, because it was like I was studying too, and he's saying he's Sanukis, like, man, but I didn't really understand. And it was really after Doc, just after Doc passed, that I began to understand, because I realized that it was his giving of himself. He embodied what he did, and we were studying him as we thought we were studying a system, but we were studying a man. And we were mimicking and trying to do our best in that way, so I understood, and it was absolutely perfect. And in fact, I appreciated Sanukis being him so much more, that now I feel so good trying to continue to instill in me him.
Yes.
It was a blessing that he shared himself with all of us, and your father and others, that they shared themselves with us. And I offer this platform for the opportunity for many others to get a chance to know the masters that we have walked with, and the masters that actually we have become, that we are walking with others. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the opportunity of coming on and sharing, with them. And I got to say this too, that of course I appreciate and I love the fact that I can share with others this, but, it's personally, so beneficial for me to get an opportunity to hear and experience you and others in such a personal way. And, so I'm personally thankful and grateful that you have given me the opportunity to share yourself with me, and through this medium, we are able to give it to others. Thank you, Hanshi. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I'm humbled. And again, thank you for allowing me to share this time with you. I appreciate what you do. I appreciate what you represent. And you built yourself an incredible legacy as well, you know, and the martial art world appreciates you for that. So, you know, I appreciate you. I appreciate the fact that we've had this time, and, you know, continue blessings, grace and peace as always. Yes. But there's something that I wanted to share. I was looking through my scrapbook, and well, there's an image, you know, this is going back to 1964, the 1964 World's Fair.
Yes. Yeah. Wow.
Yes, yes. And here's if you can see it, there's a picture of my dad and Doc, you know, when they performed at the Japanese pavilion.
Man.
And, that was part of the Dr. Nakihara's team, the jiu-jitsu team that performed at the Japanese pavilion in 1964 and in 65. You know,
yes.
At New York City World's Fair. So that in itself is another piece of history that is so valuable, you know. And there's always a connectivity there. And I'm just I love history. I'm just a nerd or a geek when it comes to that, you know. And you know, and in closing, there's something that, you know, I wanted to make mention earlier. The connectivity of today and yesterday, you know, this is a Yawata stick, a Yubibo Yawata stick. This was my father's. This is about 60 years old. And I keep it close to me. I keep it tucked away here. But I remember he always carried this. All right. And you understand the significance of it and philosophically what this represents, you know. And whenever I touch this, you know, I know that he's touched it, you know. I know his DNA is on this, you know, and I always feel that much more stronger. And I love using it, you know. It's one of those things that's just a perfect feel, and you can never ever find these. But this was something that he carried in his suit pocket all the time. But this is very dear to me. So this is something that I look at, and it reminds me of his journey, you know. And this stick here is my very first weapon. I was 10 years old, and I actually performed with this at Madison Square Garden, and it was custom made. I was a little guy. It was custom made to fit my hand and fit my forearm. And I remember I performed with this at Madison Square Garden, right there at the Felt Forum. So I hold on to these things because it keeps me grateful that, you know, I'm still here and I'm able to share stuff like that and speak about this and do what we're doing.
Awesome. Awesome. I mean, that's beautiful. I appreciate that. That's some great history. I would love if you could just take a shot of that picture, and so I could have it in my scrapbook too.
Yes.
I would appreciate that. Thank you, Hanshi Gregory Duncan. Thank you very much for your time, your patience, and being you. May God continue to bless you as I greet you.
Grace and peace. Thank you.
All right, family. Listen, you got it right here. You saw it. This was powerful, and we look forward to having another opportunity and another time to share this walk with the master. Take care, everyone.
Every student of a master here today, you reflect your master teacher. You want to walk like him. You want to talk like her. But you start by having an object in front of you that you admire.